Hello and welcome back to Coaching in Higher Education and to our mini-series on honest and in-depth conversations between coaches and their clients to demystify what leads to successful coaching engagements in higher ed and what happens once the real work really starts. I'm Tim Jansa, a leadership and organizational development coach and your host for this podcast. To dig deeper into the coach-client relationship and how they impact the outcomes of an engagement, I'm really excited to have as my guest today, Marshall Lancey, who serves as Assistant Vice President for Student Experience and as Deputy Title IX Coordinator at Curry College, and his coach, Dr. Joel Pérez of Apoyo Coaching and Consulting, and the author of Dear White Leader, How to Achieve Organizational Excellence Through Cultural Humility, who was also my guest in season 1 of the show. So check it out. So welcome to the podcast, Marshall, and welcome back, Joel, and thank you for taking the time to tell your story and share your experience.
Thank you. Really excited.
Thanks for the invitation, Tim. Looking forward to the conversation. After our last conversation, which was very engaging and I thoroughly enjoyed it, to come back on the show with you, and this time with the client of mine, Marshall, to have this conversation.
So let's start at the beginning. How did this engagement come about? Can you share a little bit about the backstory with us and kind of what went into this? Marshall, do you want to get started?
Yeah, absolutely. So I, last summer, had the opportunity to move into the role I'm currently sitting in now from an associate dean role. And so moving into more of a senior level leader position at the institution. And so with that, my supervisor recommended from some positive experiences he had that a professional coach could be really beneficial for me to sort of really navigate what it meant jumping from the 10,000 foot, you're really in the weeds, to a much more strategic thinking 30,000 foot. Kind of how do you lead a division, and what was my role as an assistant vice president going to look like and feel like. I was fortunate that the role was kind of revamped and redesigned around me. So I was also getting to step into a position that I got to define kind of what the parameters looked like. And so I think he saw a really great opportunity to partner me with Joel and to get us connected to help cultivate those skills.
Yeah, so the opportunity came to me via Marshall's supervisor, who had just promoted Marshall and really believed, because he himself had received some coaching and was a former client of mine, that Marshall could benefit from some coaching to help him really think through how to lead strategically and move into a more senior level role, given my own expertise of helping professionals, higher ed professionals, transition from one role to another, either within their organization or institutions to a new institution. And so he thought that he should connect me with Marshall. And so that's what started the conversation, was initially with Marshall's supervisor, and then being introduced to Marshall and running through a process to make sure that Marshall was comfortable with me serving as his coach.
I'm always curious about how coaching is perceived at that level. Marshall, did you have any preconceived notions about what coaching was like? Did you ever get the feeling that, oh my gosh, I'm getting coaching because I'm somehow in trouble? Or did you see the value in this from the get-go?
Yeah, I was really unfamiliar with coaching. Like I had never had it in a professional experience. I'd certainly had in developmental relationships, but I had never had kind of like a capital C coach. And so I think I was really fortunate to maybe not have some preconceived notions, and again, having my supervisor really frame it from the beginning as a strengths-based and not a deficit-based model. Like he was really great at helping me understand exactly that, to mitigate that on the front, right? This is not because you are bad at something, it's because you've never had to experience something. And so you're going to benefit from having someone who can coach you through the experiences instead of like offering corrective behavior.
Joel, you mentioned that, and you both mentioned that this engagement came about as a referral directly. What was the process? Because a lot of times what happens, of course, we are part of a bench. We might be working for a company or do our own thing. We respond to an RFP, or we are set up as providers and then we're contacted. I mean, there's a kind of an evolved process. This process, in your case, seemed to be a lot more, let's say, direct and immediate. Did you have a chemistry meeting as well? Or what went into just getting started on this?
Yeah, so generally, like you just mentioned, Tim, I'm on a bench of coaches for other organizations, or one of three coaches that get introduced to the potential client for a chemistry session, right? For the client to determine which coach they want to engage with in coaching for a coaching engagement. In this case, because I already had a relationship with Marshall's supervisor who had already experienced me, and he really felt like Marshall would benefit from working with me specifically, I did set up, and I always try to set up a preliminary conversation to make sure that there is chemistry. I call it a coaching connection call that helps the client get to know me and answer some questions really around like, what are your goals in the next 6 months? What's keeping you from achieving your goals? Those kinds of like three really prompts beforehand, so I have an understanding of at least what the client wants to achieve through coaching. In Marshall's case, I wanted to make sure that he had an understanding of what the benefits of coaching are, and that it was seen as a value add and not as a Joel, we need you to help Marshall get better at something, which was not the case with Marshall. Yeah. And so, yes, we had a 30-minute coaching connection call, initially with some preliminary questions to give me a better idea. And then we met and had a conversation. And then at that point, I left it up to Marshall to decide, yes, I want to work with Joel, or no, I don't want to work with Joel. And so I can let Marshall kind of take it from there. But that was the initial conversation that he and I had.
And he said yes.
Yes, and he said yes.
So Marshall, what were some questions you had for Joel? What was that experience like to first be matched up and kind of learn a little bit about the process and where you wanted to go?
Yeah, so I think starting with kind of Joel's facilitation questions, I think were really helpful, because they were also things I had never really thought about outside of conversations with my supervisor, right? Like, what does this job look like? What can this role look like? What does it mean to lead? And I think it was really helpful for Joel's framing around those questions were really going to be steered by me. One thing Joel also did in the course of the chemistry session was talk through what a check-in would look like, and that it would always start with, there may have been like some homework or some pre-work to do, but we're going to lead with like, what do you need to talk about today that's going to be the most helpful? And so, I mean, over the course of our 6 or 7 months together, there were some days where, maybe we had set up stuff to talk about, but I kind of came in with like I really need to discuss this thing because this thing is going on. I need to process it. And so I think that was really helpful on the front end to feel like I was going to get to drive the conversations while having access to kind of the expertise that Joel offered. I know I joked early on when we were chatting about it, right? Joel, a big baseball guy. I'm a big baseball guy. And so it was also like a nice check-in. We started over the summer. We were together through the World Series where Joel won it. And so like it was a nice opportunity to also just connect at a person level. And so it just felt really natural.
Please pardon the interruption. This is your friendly reminder that if you're enjoying today's episode, to please click like and to subscribe to the podcast. Your support is really important to us. Also, please check out the companion website, higheredcoaching.us or leadershipimagined.com/podcast. Thanks so much. And now back to the episode. Did you find that this flexibility of being able to kind of set the agenda from session to session and sometimes deviate from the more global goals, really talk about something that is more imminent, was really helpful for you, Marshall?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it was really, really helpful, both in the actual management of what was going on and like having the ability to talk through, and feeling a little bit of the safety net to know that like every 3 weeks I was going to get to have a session with Joel. So I knew I was going to have an opportunity to talk through something with both a person who was neutral and a person who had my best interests. And I think that was one of the things I didn't appreciate about coaching as much, as that it was a person who could serve dual roles. Like Joel was there for me to grow and develop. And he didn't have a huge stake on like the successes of my offices outside of wanting to see me successful. Mm-hmm. And so I think that was like a really helpful knowing that I had that space. And I think we probably sort of, I'm sure I filled 20 minutes of each session, and then we had kind of 40 minutes of like, okay, cool, like back to what we had talked about previously.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And Joel, that actually kind of brings me to my question I want to ask you. What is your technique to keep things on track? Because I know that especially some less experienced coaches, they're looking at a 6, 8, 9 month engagement. And yes, you set those global goals, but there's a lot of change, a lot of, I don't want to say volatility, but there needs to be some flexibility. And as Marshall just explained, there's some certain value in that flexibility. What do you do to keep things on track?
Well, I always start with a questionnaire for the client to work through to kind of help me understand. I do this before the first session. Then I read through, make notes, ask clarifying questions. But it always ends with, what are your goals for this engagement? What is it you want to achieve? Or what is your goal, specifically in this case, leadership goal? What will success look like in 6 months? What would it feel like? What would you hear, see, experience? What tools and resources do you need to meet that goal? And generally it's 3, either objectives or goals. And I use those words interchangeably. And then we usually finish up by the time we're done with what were the actions and results around each particular goal or objective. And that frames, and I always try to go back every so many sessions and review the objectives to make sure we're on track. And I'm a Gallup certified strengths coach, so that also helps determine course, particularly around the direction we go, around making sure the client knows what their strengths are and they're leaning into those strengths, and not just from a quick assessment tool, but actually I think Marshall will contest that there were times during the coaching engagement that I will bring them back up and say which ones are playing out right now, which ones would be helpful for you as you think about this conversation with this staff member or with your supervisor, and also start with the values exercise. And there may be some other things that I identify through the coaching time that may be helpful. And I knew you were going to ask me about the operating manual also, given the context of job transition, using that document or template to work through so the client kind of gets clear about who they are and how they lead. Because what I have found, Tim, and I'm guessing, and I know you have as well, that a lot of leaders take roles without really clearly understanding who they are and really spending time thinking about how they lead. And sometimes, and this is where it can become somewhere it's dangerous, make assumptions that people will just figure it out and then either fall in line or figure them out along the way, which then can create problems when crisis happens or when workforce reduction conversations start happening. And then I would say the client loses their rudder and doesn't know really about themselves and how to actually lead well. And so those are the tools that I use to guide. But as Marshall mentioned, if the client, in this case, Marshall, comes in and says, Joel, I had a really bad day, or I'm having this hard conversation, let's start with that. And then that's what we start with. Because I stress, the way I talk about myself is that I'm a client-centered coach. I may have an arc that we're going to go through. But if the client comes in and says, I really need to focus on this, then that's what we're going to focus on.
Yeah, because you want to do what serves the client, right? Yeah, and best at that moment, at that time. And I think one of the skills that I've discovered has served me really well, I've always prided myself on being able to keep the 30,000-foot view, but then also zoom into minute details and kind of talk about, something very specific, and then zoom back out to keep the whole engagement on track. And so, Marshall, I'm wondering, with these tools that Joel just mentioned, especially with assessment tools, you talk about StrengthsFinder, for example, how was that experience for you? Not just taking an off the shelf because it's a cool thing to do, but to actually have an assessment and then have somebody who's skilled at debriefing this and really digging deep. What was that like for you?
Yeah, it was really great. So it started with in sort of the welcome kind of 3 assessments, and then if I had any other information I could provide to share that with, again, primarily strengths was one of the main leads, and I think that was really great for a couple reasons. I think it allowed us to create a shared language where after a handful of sessions, Joel could challenge me or could point out do you think this is your maximizer showing up? Do you think this is achiever showing up, or challenging me to name those things and creating a shortcut for us to say, right, this is X, and that had created a shared understanding of what that meant and kind of how that manifested in my work. And I think it allowed me, when I was doing my own self-reflection in between our sessions, to have a scaffolding around how to think about those things, and then to be able to come to Joel to say, like, I feel like those tools allowed me to identify the problem, and so we didn't have to spend time like talking through how I was feeling. I could come in and be like, I know it's because of this. I know it's because of this. Can you help me work through it? And it's like, that was, I think, a really, really wonderful experience. And so now understanding how my thinking actually applied to that particular thing, like, made me feel a lot better about it. And so I think it was really good to have Joel's expertise kind of working me through those things.
Joel also mentioned values exercises and that operating manual. Marshall, what was that? What happened, and what effect did that have on you? What difference did it make in a positive way?
Yeah, it was way harder than I thought, in a good way, right? Like, it was maybe 70-ish words. And it starts by just pick the words that resonate with you. And you're like, okay, well, this is easy. They all resonate with me because they're nice, happy words that I want to believe in. And then it was condense those into 4 or 5 pillars that fit naturally for you. And then pick the one from that pillar that represents that pillar, right? So you kind of work your way through what's important to me, what's most salient. And it helped me sort of identify things that I don't know if I necessarily knew were so prevalent in my mind, right? So like, I am fortunate in that I've always been in a professional space where I've been encouraged to take risks and to innovate and that kind of thing. And so I think as I went through the activity, having that be one of my final 5 pillars was this idea around like risk taking and innovation and creativity work and that sort of thing. And then to one step further, to then say, like, so like, what does it look like in your job now? Like, now that you know that those are important for you, it's okay that you're learning these things after you got the job, because you get to shape the job. So like, how do we make sure the job is one where you can still get those things and your team doesn't feel out on a limb because you're this big innovator and they are like comfort safe people and don't want to take a ton of risks or don't feel the trust or that kind of thing. So like, it was helpful to lead with those. So then as we went through the work, Joel knew where I was coming from, even if I couldn't say it front of mind, like, oh, this is my risk. Like, he could sort of pull out the, like, hey, going back to your values, trust is really important, risk is really important. Are you embodying those for your teams?
Joel, what changes did you see in Marshall when he was really engaged? It seems like he was really engaged with this. And you both mentioned the shared language. I thought that's a really interesting thing, to kind of establish a certain set of vocabulary so we both knew what you were talking about. So, Joel, can you address those two a little bit?
Yeah. So what I observed in Marshall from where he started to where we ended was a growth in confidence, a more nuanced approach to leadership, particularly when it comes to leading across functional areas, which is one of the challenges that a lot of leaders face when they are responsible for one particular area and then get promoted into 3 or 4 areas. So the confidence, the ability to navigate the complexity around leading multiple areas, one of which was his own area where he has established expertise, and how he manages up and manages down and manages across, which can be a skill that a lot of leaders have to learn in some way. And if they don't have the right guidance or the right space to talk through that, could become challenging at times, right? Establishing common language with those you supervise so they know how you lead, so they understand you. That's where the operating manual can come in handy, because it's not just about developing it for yourself, although very important, but it's how do you share that information with the people that you lead so they have a better understanding of how you lead and more clarity, right? But generally in higher ed or any particular organization and or field, there's always some type of crisis or uncertainty that happens. And if you're not clear about how you lead or have a common language about how to talk about things, it can lead to misunderstanding. It could lead towards resentment if it's not addressed. And having common language, one, there's a baseline. And so that's where that plays.
So a lot of the metacognitive skills really come in to kind of support that, and then the language kind of like as the embodiment of these metacognitive skills, which you can then also share with others. So what you both have touched on is this idea of mindset shift. Through reflection, of course, through also externalizing and articulating, certain leadership styles, and then also learning from others of what is needed, and especially Marshall, since you went through a transition that involved moving up and all of a sudden requiring different skills and different attitudes and dispositions. I'm wondering, Marshall, if you were to compare like your before and after mindset for this coaching engagement, how would those compare?
Yeah, I think very different. I think the coaching absolutely moved me in I hope a positive and constructive direction. I remember early on, in part of like the what do you hope to get out of this? What are the areas you think you need to improve on? Um, One of the things I wrote about was I feel really strong in getting the people who report to me to like do the things that I want to do. Like if I want to effectuate change, if I want to put in a program, that either through personality or leadership skills or charisma, getting them to buy in on it. And I really struggled with getting them to effectuate my vision with their teams. So as I moved to the director role, I was like, gosh, my directors aren't envisioning my team with my vision with their teams. Like, how do I get them to do that? I look back on that now and I'm like, gosh, that was like such the wrong way to look at being a leader of the team, right? Like being the AVP is not like, great, now I have these 4 direct reports. You just get to like take my vision and go do it. It's about how do I lead with values and lead with transparency and empower them to meet the ultimate goals of the student, right? Because like at the end of the day, what I want kind of charged through the institution and through my vice president is to create like a meaningful, safe learning environment for students. I have visions of what that can look like, but I was like disempowering my directors in sort of saying like, damn, why can't I get them to just do the thing that I want them to do? And so I think even like my first answer to the question was like a fundamentally wrong way to think about what it meant to be a leader in that role. And so I look back at it now and it feels so silly like that was the answer as I sort of like a proof point of like where I do think that I've seen a lot of growth.
So it's the shift basically from influencing through power and positionality through exerting real influence and kind of influencing and leading the roundabout way, and not necessarily getting your vision articulated and then expecting everybody to fall in line. I know this is something that a lot of people struggle with sometimes. Joel, what patterns do you typically see when you're working with higher ed leaders who are moving from more, let's say, more siloed expert, whether they're on the administrative side or on the academic side, to more of a role where systems integration and systems thinking and maintaining a more of a high level influence stance is more important?
Well, I didn't say this earlier, but Marshall is one of those that's an ideal client. And by ideal, I mean, he put in the work, received the feedback well, not feedback in like, you need to fix this, but like what he was learning through the process and applying it. And those of you who coach who are watching know that you have your ideal clients and you have your clients who may not be as ideal. And when you have an ideal client, it's really energizing as a coach, right? And so the patterns I see, Tim, and that's your question is really good, is leaders, I included, I'll just share my own example, pick up bad habits along the way from other leaders that we've observed, thinking that is the ideal leader because we observe them being successful, or the culture we lead in or work in is not a good work culture. And so we take that into a new organization and we just make an assumption that you're just going to slot into a new role, particularly at a high level role. And you're gonna, because you've been told you're really good, you're successful, and we see potential in you. And then they show up, and the pattern is they just want to lean on what worked in their last role, either from bad habits they observed or what worked for them, which in reality may not work for this new organization. the pattern I see is just a lack of awareness that could be potential for problems that could lead to a derailment in their success, ultimately leading into not a good fit, having to leave the organization within a year because it's just been really bad, or they just continue to operate and create a toxic culture themselves that then causes people that they're leading to leave.
Well, as Marshall Goldsmith's famous book says, what got you here won't get you there. And leadership is so highly contextual. And just because what you do and how you do it works in one particular context, when you move laterally or up or down or whatever, or to another institution, it's not necessarily a recipe for success. You both mentioned doing the work. Marshall, what did this doing the work look like for you? Was there something you started doing differently, certain habits you embraced, or can you walk us through that a little bit?
Yeah. And I think it was iterative through kind of the 7 months. I think early on it was like the very literal, Joel would give me reflective assignments. He'd give me prompts that I would write about. I would send him beforehand so we could kind of talk through what I had done. The really early iterations of the operating manual. And then I think that work then set itself up for how I approached the actual meetings I was having with my team. I think a lot of what Joel and I focused on were conversations that I had directly with my direct reports and sort of how was I going to lead them and empower them. And I saw in the course of, especially with my 4 direct reports, a change in how I was approaching the conversations, right? I think we sort of wrapped early in our appreciating that I wasn't quite doing like AVP level thinking. I was doing a lot of co-directing. And so I think as I was trying to gradually shift out of this co-directing role of like day-to-day operations and help them see that I cared about what the ops were, but I didn't want to be involved in what the ops were unless they wanted me to. And so I think that there were material changes I made in how I approached the conversations with them, what types of questions I asked them. And I think that helped a lot because then it helped reframe, we're going to have this very traditional 1 hour one-on-one a week, and that's going to be mission, vision, planning. And then there may be a moment when you need to send me a Teams note or an email. What do you think of this program? Instead of those vision conversations being an email and kind of vice versa.
Mm-hmm. Joel, with all these changes that were happening in Marshall, I mean, was there one moment that really stuck out to you where in the course of this you said, wow, he just moved, like when the last couple of weeks, he just moved from here to here? Or something where you said, I never thought we were going to get there, but we finally did, or something that surprised you? What stuck out to you from this engagement?
Yeah, that's a good question. I would say what comes to mind is we were having a session around triangulating and how to, because a lot of times as leaders, particularly those of us who move into senior level roles, who are supervising or being working with a lot of people, we can sometimes get drawn into triangulation where people come to us to solve problems, but not talking to each other. And so when Marshall realized around how to have that conversation and developing a strategy, that was a moment where I'm like, okay, he's getting it. He can recognize now when he's being pulled into something which could create problems because I'm complaining to Marshall because this person's not doing their work. And that other person's coming to Marshall and says, Joel's not doing his work. And instead of Marshall trying to figure out what to do, he was at a point now where he knows what to do. And I think the other thing is we did this coaching around agreements versus expectations, where a leader clearly states not what they expect, because when you tell someone you expect something, there's already some barriers that go up. But if you have a conversation where you help the person come to an agreement with you about how you're going to move forward, it is nuanced, but it's a much better approach than just telling them, I expect you to be on time. And conveying those expectations generally are not received well by some people. So saying, okay, so what I've heard, this is what we've discussed. Can't we agree that the next time you show up at the meeting, you're going to be on time? And this was not an example this is just my example. And they will generally say, yes, I can agree to that. So that way, when you have to come back and say, remember when we agreed? It wasn't you having to buy into my expectations. It was we did this together. And now there's some challenges that we need to figure out. And so when Marshall began to look at it using that lens, that was another like moment of me as a coach is like, he's getting it.
Marshall, what the two instances that Joel just mentioned, are those the ones that also stick in your mind? Or is there maybe something else, a specific question Joel might have asked or a perspective that he offered that really made a difference for you?
Yeah, so those were both big for me. Joel's kind, not to mention. There was one maybe halfway through where we were processing through how do I have my team empowered to make decisions, if it may not be the decision that I would have made, right? So sort of how do I step away and get the space? And I was like really spinning around the axle on how do I get to that place. And Joel, I think really uninsidiously was like, okay, well, think of a time that you were convinced that you were wrong. Like how did that happen? How did that person sort of walk you to get your mind changed? And I sat for like, I'm sure what was only like 12 seconds, but felt like 6 minutes. And I was like, Joel, I literally can't think of a time I've ever changed my mind on something. And that was like a really humbling experience. That can't possibly be true. And then I was able to like think, I obviously have, but that was like a real moment for me to be like, holy cow, like one, if I'm going to be resolute in my decisions, that's great and fine. I can't then tell my team, right, you can talk me into stuff. And so it was really helping me recalibrate for myself. Like, I obviously don't approach the work with the belief that like everything I think is right and great. But connected to my strengths and how they manifest, if I am asked for an opinion, I will give an opinion, and then I will have a predetermined, like, that's the right way we should do it. And so that was like a really wonderful awakening moment for me to think through, like, okay, like I need to be able to communicate this with my team, specifically like, hey, if you ask me an opinion, I will give it to you. But before I give people my opinion, especially in my direct reports, it's basically to try as hard as possible to not, right? It is like I approach those conversations to be like, okay, great, like I think what you're asking for me is an answer. I don't want to give you an answer. I want to help coach you through what you think is the right decision to give me the right decision. And so that was like another, like him just literally asking that question for me, like having to sit in that moment was both really difficult, but I think really, really helpful in the long term to think about like what does my actual managerial relationship look and feel like.
I think those are the kind of questions that we learn in coaching training is really the high impact questions, right? That may be really short, but just get right to the meat of the matter. So to start wrapping things up, Joel, I'm wondering, every coaching engagement is different. We always would like to think we grow, we learn something. What was your learning from this engagement with Marshall that made you a different, a better, maybe a more finely attuned coach? What comes to mind?
Yeah, well, I learned something new with every client I work with, right? About myself, about the process I'm guiding clients through, particularly about helping me refine my process and where we start, what the middle point is, what the end point is. So how I start, how I check in, how I end. Because there's always ways for us to get better as coaches. And that's the growth mindset piece. So for me, what I learned about myself is that the process that I walked or worked with Marshall through really does work. And every time it happens, and it has happened at other times, but it just reinforces that start, middle, end will work. And I need to trust my process, right? And that it reinforces the power of strengths or an assessment tool, particularly with the operating manual as being a powerful tool to get people to be reflective. What I learned about myself around particularly working with Marshall is that I can have the confidence in walking him through the process. And it goes back to what I just reinforcement is continued confidence, and particularly with higher ed leaders who are transitioning into new roles, that this process is going to work.
Well, Marshall, I want to give you the last word, so to speak, because I would love to hear from you. If you would summarize like the essence of your experience working with Joel into like distill it into one piece of advice for other higher ed professionals who might consider coaching, but who might be hesitant, what would that be? If somebody just says, what was it like and maybe why should I do this?
Yeah, I mean, it was like so emphatically worth it. I think I enjoyed getting to know Joel as a person. I so valued the opportunity. I think as I sort of led with, I don't know if I appreciated or fully knew or was able to say it in so few words. It's kind of the like knowing that I always had a person who always had my back and had no incentive not to be totally honest with me was really great. And I think, again, I certainly have mentors in my life and friends and colleagues, but having a professional sounding board that I knew just wanted to see me grow and develop was something I didn't know I was missing relative to like, my boss is still worried about the institution, right? And like Joel cares about Curry College, but like insofar as because I'm there. Or like colleagues that work at other institutions don't have the same vested interest in it, right? So it was like knowing that I had a person who was solely focused on my growth and my success in whatever that looked like. I mean, I was really, really fortunate that the college supported me both in time and resources and finances to get to participate in this coaching. It was so impactful for me. I'm continuing that on my own personal expense because I have found such value in having these check-ins with Joel that to put my money where my mouth is, right? Like to also want to continue that relationship because it has been so beneficial that I am not ready to not have Joel in my bi-weekly or tri-weekly check-ins.
Well, yay for coaching and yay for the two of you. Thank you for your willingness to share this experience. I mean, we all know that the coach-client relationship is sacrosanct. I mean, it's something that a lot of times we don't talk about. It's very confidential. And so we extra appreciate your willingness to share your experience, give us a little bit of an insight into this. And Joel, of course, for you as a coach, it's been wonderful to have you back on. You both seem to have done an amazing job and you continue to do amazing work. So again, thank you for making time to be here today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And to all of our listeners and viewers in the audience, thank you for spending a little bit of time with us today. If you want to get some more information about Joel, I will put his information, also link to his website and everything, on the companion site, which is higheredcoaching.us or leadershipimagined.com/podcast. And there you can find all other episodes of season 1 and season 2 of this series and just some general information about our guests, about our topics, and about me if you care. So thank you so much for being here today. See you again soon. Until then, keep making a difference. One client and one conversation at a time. Take care.